Have you ever been to any historical museums? Although I wish I had, I've never been to one. I do like going to historical places though, such as Tiananmen Square or the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. If I had a chance to travel, I might like to go to the pyramids in Egypt or the Colosseum in Rome because I really love historical sites.
Yes, I have. I have been to the National Historical Museum in Xi'an Province.
Do you like history? Yes, I love it. China has such a rich history to study, but I hated learning about it in school, where we had to remember so many dates and places. So I just like to learn about it on my own, by going to historical sites and so on. Every site I see makes me more interested in history.
Overall, I am quite into history. It's true that many people complain history is too boring, but I disagree. I think it's the history class that is boring because it's always just about this person did that in this year. From my personal experience, history is hugely important in that it helps us understand why the world is what it is and what it takes to live a meaningful life. For example, one thing I learned from reading history is that the constant wars in Africa have a lot to do with the European powers' colonization in the 19th century.
Why not? In China, there are many dynasties from Xia, Shang to Qing, and many celebrities who are brilliant. I love listening some stories about them and the alternation of dynasties. Beyond that, I can learn some principles about life, even some common senses. I think it's a good thing to know more about history anyway.
Yes, I find history very interesting. It was one of my favorite subjects in high school. I especially enjoy learning the period of Tang Dynasty in China.
I was always very interested in history when I was a little girl. I always took some historical books from my father's bookshelf and read the historical events. And I regret that when I was at school, I had a history teacher who wasn't very good. And he just used to tell us a date on what happened. It was presented to us in a way that wasn't interesting at all. Just a list of numbers and a short sentence about what happened in that year. I think history is supposed to be presented as a story, a narrative.
When was the last time you read about history? When my parents and I went to see the Great Wall of China recently, we read a lot about the history of the part of the wall that we saw. It was really interesting to learn about, and I loved reading about it on Baidu.
Actually, I was reading history book last night. I have the habit of reading before I go to sleep. It happens that I was reading a book about a historical character.
I was cleaning the room the other day and found a really interesting history book called Great Ideas of the Ancient Times. The book described how ancient people solved problems with artful and brilliant ideas. I was purchased when I was young, so I sat there and flipped through the book.
I'm constantly reading about history because if you want to understand the world, you have to understand history. I remember reading one recently about the history of Soviet times. The book, similar to biography, introduces some ordinary Soviet families and their lives during that time.
Did you like history when you were young? When I was young, I hated learning history because, in our schools we have to learn history through repeating dates and places over and over. But even though I hated the repetition, I loved the knowledge.
Absolutely. As I have mentioned earlier, it was one of my favorite subjects. I developed an interest for history at a very young age. The stories that I read were very fascinating to me.
Okay, here is the part 1 topic of history. Let's have a listen to the first question.
Have you ever been to any historical museums?
Notice the tense, present perfect. Have you ever been? So use that in your answer.
Although I wish I had, I've never been to one. I do like going to historical places though, such as Tiananmen Square or the Temple of Heaven in Beijing.
Alright, let's stop there for a second. Okay, so although I wish I had, using the past tense, I've never been to one. Using the tense from the question, I've never been to one. So if the question is in the present perfect tense, it's not a bad idea to also use the present perfect tense in your answer. I do like, notice here the do used for emphasis. He gives some examples of historical places. Tiananmen Square, Temple of Heaven, and here comes the if sentence.
Temple of Heaven in Beijing. If I had a chance to travel, I might like to go to the pyramids in Egypt or the Colosseum in Rome because I really love historical sites.
Okay, so basically the structure of the answer is no, but if I had the chance, notice if I had the chance, or you could say if I have the chance in the future. If you think there's a great chance that something is going to happen, you might say if I have the chance. What was I saying now? Alright, so basically the structure is no, but if I had the chance, I would do this. And he throws some examples in of historical places. It's the way his answer is structured. Let's have a listen to sample 2.
Yes, I have. I have been to the National Historical Museum in Xi'an province.
Similar structure, but a lot shorter. Also the present perfect tense and 2 examples. But if you look at the grammar, it's pretty repetitive, right? Have, and here again, have. Not as good as the first one. Second question.
Do you like history?
Okay, pretty simple. Here's the present tense, so we would expect to see the present tense again in the answer.
Yes, I love it. China has such a rich history to study, but I hated learning about it in school, where we had to remember so many dates and places. So I just like to learn about it on my own.
Okay, so I don't know why I'm talking about the tenses so much, but this guy does switch between the tenses pretty well. Going from the past tense, from the present tense here, China has, to his time in school where he hated learning about history, and what he does now. He likes to learn about it on his own,
My own, by going to historical sites and so on. Every site I see makes me more interested in history.
Every site I see makes me more interested in history. The answer is a little bit short. I mean, if he's that, I know before you mentioned the Colosseum and I forgot the name of the other place, the pyramids, right? So every site I see makes me more interested in history. For example, that time I went to, and then you can talk about the place that really helped spark your interest in history. Sample 2.
Overall, I am quite into history. It's true that many people...
See, the guy's reading quite slowly. He doesn't quite get into the rhythm of talking. Okay, anyway. So I am into history. So if here we have the adjective into, it's fine to use. It's not a problem. History history is too boring. Just be careful if you are a Chinese speaker. When you use the word too in English, too does not mean very. There's a difference between saying something is too boring and something is very boring. If something is too boring, it means you are unable to do something else. So I don't know if here he actually meant to say very boring.
Complain history is too boring, but I disagree. I think it's the history class that is boring because
I notice now he says boring instead of boring. All right, let me fix that. All right, let's continue here.
boring because it's always just about this person did that in this year.
Okay, so he's trying to contrast himself with other people. Some people think history is boring. He disagrees. In his opinion, it's the class that's boring because it's all about the dates and who did what in what year. This person did that in this year. This is not a bad structure to use. Look at this here. This person did that in this year, going from this to that to this. That's kind of a neat idea.
Year. From my personal experience, history is hugely important in that it helps us understand why the world is what it is.
Okay, so the marker here from my personal experience, and look at the structure here. Why the world is what it is. Maybe you could improve it a little bit by just putting some stress here on the is. Why the world is what it is. He doesn't really stress anything, he just reads it.
It helps us understand why the world is what it is.
Maybe there's a little bit of stress there. I would have stressed it more. Why the world is what it is.
And what it takes to live a meaningful life. For example,
Okay, I'm very happy that he gives an example because I don't really understand what he's saying here. What it takes to live a meaningful life. If you're going to say something like that, yes, give an example.
one thing I learned from reading history is that
You don't read history, you can read about history. One thing I learned from reading about history is...
that the constant wars in Africa have a lot to do with the European powers' colonization in the 19th century.
Okay, the language is really good, but the delivery is horrible. He's speaking too slowly, and he's reading everything. I don't quite see the connection here. What it takes to live a meaningful life. I was expecting to hear an example of this. Instead, he talked about the colonization of Africa. What? What is the connection between the two? I mean, I do understand there is a connection between why the world is what it is. Right, he explained that. But this is closer, this phrase here, what it takes to live a meaningful life. This is closer to the example. So I would have thought this was going to be what the example was going to be about. But nope, it's not. But there's some terrific language here. Look at the adjective here. Constant wars. European powers. This great noun phrase. Colonization. Another great noun phrase. Good language. Not so good with the delivery. Sample 3.
Why not? In China, there are many dynasties.
Well, this is in the past, so this should be in the past tense. In China, there were many dynasties.
From Xia, Shang to Qing, and many celebrities who are brilliant.
What's the connection between dynasties and celebrities? I don't follow.
I love listening some stories about them.
Listening to some stories about them.
And the alternation of dynasties.
I'm sure she wanted to... Actually, maybe I should change this. I know she wanted to say of, but she said if. Let me fix that. Alright. Yeah, I know she wanted to say if. What am I saying? I know she wanted to say of, but what came out was if. Now here she uses the word alternation. Alternation means something switches between A and B. But that's not what she's trying to say, because there weren't just two dynasties in the history of China. At first we had this dynasty and then the other one, and then that one came back and this one fell out of power. And it doesn't just switch between the two. So alternation is not the right word to use. What she should have said is the rise and fall of dynasties. Let's see here. I love listening to some stories about them and their rise and fall, because if you use the pronoun them rather, if you use the pronoun them and then you use the noun again, it sounds kind of weird. So I love listening to stories about them and their rise and fall, not alternation, rise and fall.
Beyond that, I can learn some principles about life, even some common senses.
It's common sense, not common senses. I can learn some principles about life, even some common sense. If I were her, I'd throw in an example here. I don't know what common sense you can learn from history. I mean, I'm sure there is something, but throw us an example.
I think it's a good thing to know more about history. Anyway.
Very weird to put the anyway here at the end. Okay, the last sentence is pointless. I don't know why she said that. Sample 4.
Yes, I find history very interesting. It was one of my favorite subjects in high school.
So far, so good.
I especially enjoy learning the period.
Nope. Oh, see now, he's talking about high school, so I was expecting the past tense. But I guess he still enjoys this now. So I especially enjoy. So he still enjoys this. Never mind.
I especially enjoy learning the period of Tang Dynasty in China.
Nah, that's not the right way to say that. I especially enjoy learning about the Tang Dynasty in China. The dynasty is a period. It's a period of time. So there's no period of Tang Dynasty. And also it's the Tang Dynasty. So I enjoy learning about the Tang Dynasty in China. I don't know why, because he didn't say why. Sample 4.
I was always very interested in history when I was
Okay, so you mispronounced interested. Interesting.
a little girl. I always took some historical books from my father's bookshelf.
If a book is historical, it means it's very, very old. I think what she's trying to say is history books, not historical books. I took some history books from my father's bookshelf.
Read the historical events and
This is not right either.
historical books from my father's bookshelf and read the historical events.
Okay, first of all, this was when she was a little girl, so past tense, took. But here she says read. And you can't read. Well, first of all, it should be. Never mind. You can't read about historical events. So you can't read historical events. You can read about historical events. You can read a book, but you read about historical events. I don't know why there's an here. And read historical events. Did she say that?
And I regret that when I was
Let's go back to that sentence.
father's bookshelf and read the historical events.
Yeah, she said but then it's events. That's obviously wrong. Events are countable, so there's no pronoun.
And I regret that when I was at school, I had a history teacher who wasn't very good.
I regret that wasn't. Yeah, that's fine. Another way you could say this, I was thinking, and I regret not having a very good history teacher when I was in school. So you can also have I regret not VING. I regret not having a history teacher who was very good.
And he just used to tell us a date on what happened. It was presented to us in a way that wasn't interesting at all.
Okay, now she's moving back to the past tense. Yeah, there's some good referencing here. The it's referring to the history lessons. Okay.
Interesting at all. Just a list of numbers and a short sentence about what happened in that year. I think history
Also that year. More good referencing.
is supposed to be presented as a story, a narrative.
Okay, here we see the pause here. That's pretty good. Also, a little bit of rise in intonation here when we hear a narrative.
Presented as a story, a narrative.
She sounds almost natural. Okay, I guess that's the end of it. Alright, next question.
When was the last time you read about history?
Okay, and sample 1.
When my parents and I went to see the Great Wall of China recently, we read a lot about the history of the part of the wall that we saw.
The part of the wall that we saw. Alright, he's keeping the grammar tight, everything's accurate.
It was really interesting to learn about, and I loved reading about it on Baidu.
I can't really say this too much that really stands out in that answer. Let's move on to the next one.
Actually, I was reading history book last night.
Whenever I do the test and people tell me that they just did this thing that we talk about, I always think, really? I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Anyway, let's look at the language. Books are countable, so we need an article. I was reading a history book last night.
I have the habit of reading before I go to sleep. It happens that I was reading a book about a historical character.
So now, if you don't give any names, then I really don't believe what you're saying. What's the book he was reading? Okay, it happens that I was, so it was like a coincidence. Some people might say it so happens that I was reading a book. You could have fleshed this answer out a little bit better by telling us more about the character. If your answer is this short, I'm pretty sure the examiner is going to say why. Why were you reading about a historical character? Alright, here's sample 3.
I was cleaning the room the other day.
The room. Which room? You can't start off by being this specific. I was cleaning my room. I was cleaning the kitchen. I was cleaning the... I can't think of any other rooms to say now. The study? Which room?
I found a really interesting history book called Great Ideas of the Ancient Times.
I'm guessing she wanted to say called there. Okay. She knows some names. What's the name again? Great Ideas of the Ancient Times. Alright, good on her for knowing the name.
The Ancient Times. The book described how ancient
Nah, see, the book still describes. So this should be in the present tense. The book describes, because you can pick up the book now and read it, and it's still going to be saying the same thing. The book describes how,
people solve problems with artful and brilliant ideas.
Artful and brilliant ideas. Okay, interesting language. Good language. Brilliant and ideas. These words go well together. I'm not so sure about the artful. I don't hear too much about artful ideas. But I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying brilliant and ideas. These two words go together very well. Artful and ideas, not so much.
Brilliant ideas. That was purchased.
Yeah, I'm guessing she wanted to say it. It was purchased.
While I was young. So I sat there and flipped through the book.
What is the connection between her being young when the book was bought and her flipping through the book? I don't understand the so. It was purchased while I was young. And also, it's not while I was young, it's when I was young. While is like for a shorter period of time. I'm confused about the so. I don't see the connection between the two. So if you're hoping to get a 7 for coherence, you cannot be saying, so I sat there and flipped through the book. Also, did she say flip or flipped?
Purchased while I was young. So I sat there and flipped through the book.
I hear flip. Alright, so it should be flipped. Because sat, flipped. Flip is a good verb to use, but you've got to be using the past tense. Flip through a book, so you're kind of quickly turning the pages. Sample 4.
I'm constantly reading about history, because if you want to understand a word, you have...
Oh boy, okay, so she, like so many people, have difficulty pronouncing the word world. Oh, and I have difficulty typing the word. Oh boy, world, not word. Alright. Here we go. Okay, so if you want to understand the world, you have to understand history. I heard something. Oh, here. If you want to understand. If you want to understand.
Want to understand the world, you have to understand history. I remember reading one recently about the history of Soviet times.
Okay, so again, this woman's referencing. I remember reading one, referring back to. Let's get the phrase exactly correctly. Actually, here I don't know what the one refers to. Because here she says history. The one refers to a book, right? But she never actually used the noun book. So it's not clear what the one refers to. I'm assuming it's a book.
Reading one recently about the history of Soviet times.
Or we could just say Soviet history.
The book similar to biography.
Biographies are countable, so we have to say the book is similar to a biography. Or the book is similar to. Okay, that's fine. Similar to a biography.
Biography introduces some ordinary.
Here it should be introducing, because she's talking about this subject. So this subject, the book, is similar to a biography, and the book, introduces this, right? But if we drop the noun, then if we use, how should I explain this? Okay, here's the be verb. Here's the first verb. And the action, being similar to a biography, refers to the book. The second verb is also being done by this subject. So it's not introduces. If you're going to drop the subject, it's introducing. The book is similar to a biography, introducing some ordinary
Some ordinary Soviet families and their lives during that time.
Introducing. In English, we don't use the word introduces as much as Chinese speakers use the word. Why not say tells the tale? The book tells the tale of some ordinary Soviet families. Or in this case, it would be telling the tale of some ordinary Soviet families and their lives during that time.
Did you like history when you were young?
Okay, first response.
When I was young, I hated learning history. Because, in our schools we have to learn history through repeating dates and places over and over.
Okay, learning history. You have to learn history through repeating. Okay, it's nothing really outstanding there.
And places over and over. But even though I hated the repetition, I loved the knowledge.
I don't know. Not much I can say here. As always, knowledge about what? Give an example. Expand your answer a little bit. This answer is really short. How long is it? It is 15. 10 seconds. It's short. Examples. And the last sample.
Absolutely. As I have mentioned earlier, it was one of my favorite subjects. I developed an interest for history at a very young age. The stories that I read were very fascinating to me.
Yeah, this is one of those nothing answers. That the stories I read were very fascinating to me. I do notice that Chinese-speaking people do overuse the phrase, or just not the phrase, the word fascinating. Everything is fascinating. If it's that fascinating, then you should talk a little bit more about it and tell us what you found so fascinating about it. Alright, that's it for the topic of history.